Hello and welcome back to Unit 7. Here we're talking about now stress, coping, and health as we come to a conclusion in these last two lessons for Unit 7A on motivation, emotion, and stress. So with this lesson, one of two, we're going to be talking about stress, coping, and health. Again, there's a good chance if you're watching this, you probably know what contributes to your stress. You know your typical responses when you get stressed out. You know that there's types of stress you experience, but we're going to try to classify all those things now. The nature of stress. So what is stress? In this picture here, stress is definitely the fish. Yeah, that fish is doomed. But stress in general, there's a couple types. It means any circumstances that threaten or perceive to threaten your well-being and your coping abilities. I think that second part is often sometimes forgotten, but the ability to cope with stress and your coping abilities is also pretty important. So let's talk about the causes of stress. We have everyday stress, major and minor stressors, which are often cumulative in nature. What that means is when you get stressed out, when something else starts to happen that also stresses you out, this tends to build and add an effect of compounded stress. But we go through our coping mechanisms, and in order to get there, we use a process called appraisal. So appraisal is basically trying to say, how do we handle our stress? How do we even decide if something is stressful in the first place? So the first step, primary appraisal, is basically just deciding one of three things. You look at the situation of the event, whatever it is, and you say, is it irrelevant to me? Is it relevant but not threatening? Or is it relevant but threatening? If it's relevant but threatening, then that makes it stressful. So if you decide it is stressful, then you go into secondary appraisal. Secondary appraisal, an evaluation of your coping resources and options for dealing with stress. So basically what that's saying is, I'm now trying to figure out, okay, I've got this stressful event. Am I prepared? Am I able to handle the stress? So, maybe you throw out a bunch of job applications, you're looking for a job, nothing's really coming back, and you get a call. Somebody wants you to come in for an interview. Okay, right away, you're deciding through primary appraisal, relevant and threatening. So it's stressful. So then you go to step two. All right, you're prepared for your job interview, or are you? Are you going to be well dressed? Are you going to be well spoken? Are you going to be impressive? These are elements of you understanding your level of preparedness, and that goes through secondary appraisal. So when we have stress, there are basically two major types of stress. One of them is called an acute stressor. Acute stressor means that you know exactly when the stressor is going to end. There's a clear end point, and it's a very short duration stress. So, for example, if you have a test coming up and you're planning on studying for the test and you're getting very stressed out because you find the material difficult, once you take that test, that stressor, the acute stressor, is gone. Okay, you can now no longer worry about stressing out for the test, but you probably created a new stressor, which is now an acute stressor about what the grade. What grade did I get on the test? When am I going to get the grade back? Did I do well? How do I know? So you go through all that stuff. That's an acute stressor. You know when it ends. The other type is a chronic stressor. Chronic stressors have a longer duration and a time limit that continues and continues and continues, and you just don't really know when it ends. So, for example, if someone's drowning in credit card debt, they may not truly know when they're going to be able to pay off all those debts. So it's true they might get a letter that says if they paid a minimum payment for this many months, this is when they could expect to be paying off the debt. But kind of disregarding that part, they may not actually know when the debt is going to be going bye-bye. And so it's a long duration, no readily apparent time limit. That's a chronic stressor. Now, what I want to do is show you the four types of stress. These are very easy. You've probably heard of some of these or all of them, just not thinking about them in this way. So number one is frustration. Frustration is caused when you want something, you're pursuing a goal, and it's blocked, it's thwarted. You want something that you can't have. You want to get somewhere and you get stuck in traffic. That's frustrating. You want to do something or be someone, and maybe the goal is a little unrealistic. That's frustrating. If you have a failure at something, that's a frustration. Also losses. If you lose a friend, they move away, or if you lose a pet or you lose an aging family member, death is tough, loss is tough. And ideally, we would never want to live in a world where we lose people and where we lose stuff, but it is part of life and it happens. And that's sad. And so that loss is actually frustrating because rather than having that person gone, even if you believe based on religion or whatever that they're in a better place now, they're no longer suffering, the place you would probably most likely have them is with you. So because you can't have that now, it's frustrating. So that's one of the 4 types of causes of stress. Next, we have conflict. As you can see, there's a couple examples here, but conflict is basically when you have competition. You have 2 or more incompatible motivations or behavioral impulses that are competing for expression. So I want to give you some examples with these 3 types of conflict. You have an approach conflict. This is 2 attractive choices. Maybe you want to go out for some lunch or some dinner with some friends, and you guys can't decide, but you love Chick-fil-A and you also love Bojangles. Either way, you're going to get food. You love them both equally. So it's an approach conflict. Either way, you're going to get chicken, good chicken, because you like both places and all of your friends also like both places. Not a very stressful conflict, but it's still technically a conflict. Then you have avoidance conflict. Now you have 2 unattractive choices. This is very stressful because either way, you're basically picking an unattractive choice, an unattractive conflict. And so what I would say here with avoidance would be maybe you take a demeaning job, something that is you're shameful about it, it's embarrassing. You take that demeaning job, or you choose to do something else which you have some perceived shame with. I've seen examples before where somebody either takes a demeaning job or they sign up for welfare benefits and they feel ashamed that they have to do that and they don't want people to know. So it's like, do you become a person who's on welfare and you're ashamed of that, or do you take a demeaning job which is embarrassing to you and demeaning to you as a human being? So that is a pretty stressful conflict because you kind of have 2 perceived negative outcomes. And then actually the very stressful one, which often leads to what's called vacillation or basically indecisiveness, is approach avoidance. And so this is the notion of you've got a clear goal with an attractive option. However, there's an unattractive string attached. So for example, at your job, you can get a huge promotion where you get a massive raise. That's the good part of it, the approach. But the avoidant aspect of it is that in taking this new job or the new promotion with a huge raise, you have to now move your entire family across the country into the middle of nowhere. That's pretty unattractive. Or maybe now in taking this huge raise, you have to travel and be gone away from your family who you love spending time with 95% of the time. Well, that is, a nice raise, but then there's that string attached. So this one actually leads to lots of indecisiveness where people are not really sure, oh man, what do I choose? So those are some conflicts. What about change? Life change in particular, when you experience living circumstances that require readjustment. Before I ever started teaching this class, I didn't even know that there was an actually social readjustment rating scale, the SRRS. Has 43 major life events. A lot of them are negative, but it's showing you actually how life changes have been quantified. So take a look. I'm going to show you it. So life change units. The higher the life change units, the more significant impact it has on your life. The fewer life change units, the lesser the impact. So like a minor violation of the law, not going to have a big life change impact. Death of your spouse, however, huge life change impact. So you can take a look at this list. I'm not going to read them out to you, but you can pause it and look at the list. All right, and let's get to the last one. The last one we have, so reviewing, we had frustration, we had conflict, we had life change. Last one, we have pressure. Pressure is expectation or demands that one behaves in a certain way. So you can have a pressure to perform. You can also have a pressure to conform. So pressure to perform would basically be like if you're a salesperson, and as a salesperson, you've got to sell a certain amount of that product. Otherwise, you don't get enough salary to put food on the table for you or for your family. So that's a pressure to perform. Pressure to conform is with clothes. So maybe you conform to a certain dress code when you're in a certain environment. Maybe at school, for example, we have a dress code that we're supposed to enforce and that we're supposed to abide by. And most people do a good job with that. So you're conforming by not wearing items or articles of clothing that go against that dress code, or in any other place. If you went to a funeral or a wedding, or you went somewhere else to a fancy restaurant and they have a policy that's like no t-shirts, you have to have a blazer or a coat on. That's a pressure to conform. All right, the second part of this lesson is how do we actually respond to stress? So you may be thinking, what do you normally do? The go-to response of giving into a craving. Maybe you go for some junk food, some ice cream. Maybe you like to work out. Maybe you just sit and cry. There's a lot of options. That's a reality. So let's talk about how we respond to stress. First, you have to understand that from an emotional level, we tend to elicit an emotion and increase that over time. So you don't go from 0 to raging at level 100. You don't go from I'm a little cautious to like I'm overwhelmed with fear. You don't go to feeling a little bit of dejected to okay, I'm in despair and grief. Okay, the emotion is elicited and then over time it's increasing. So before you're ever raging, you're probably getting angry, and before that, you're probably being annoyed. Before you experience fear, you're probably experiencing anxieties, and then before that, to start it off, you've got feelings of apprehension. When you experience dejection, that builds. Maybe you have dejection and like feeling like you have no attachments, loneliness, sadness, and then grief. And so emotion is building. It's elicited and increasing over time. And there's a theory around some of these ideas. It's called the broaden and build theory of positive emotion. So it's trying to look at the not so much negative emotions that we experience, but what about more some of the positive things? So as you experience an emotion and a curiosity within your environment, how you expand that into action over time. This is how you build skills, resources. For example, somebody who's curious about the outdoors and landscapes, maybe they then learn valuable knowledge for navigation. Somebody who begins to have interactions with a random stranger, somebody that they don't know, and they're positive interactions, that's how you build to a friendship. People who are just aimlessly playing outside who then channel that into exploring exercise and healthiness for their bodies, that kind of stuff. So that's the broaden and build theory. Here's Yerkes Dodson law again. You should have seen this from one of the earlier lessons. Again, the inverted U hypothesis. Stress is again part of this because there's a good chance if you are having too much at stake, a high level of arousal into a behavior or task, you're probably really stressed out and you're underperforming. If you don't have enough stress into something though, you have a low level, a low interest, you're bored, you're underperforming. So you got to match arousal and stress with that midpoint where you're going to perform at the most optimal level of both arousal and then for performance. But let's talk about some physiological responses to stress. So of course, as a review, there's Walter Cannon's fight or flight response. You may remember that from Unit 2 in biology, how we experience fight or flight as an adrenaline rush and a bunch of changes to our body. And again, that's the sympathetic, that is to get the sympathetic nervous system. And then you have the divisions of the autonomic nervous system, and you've got the sympathetic and then the parasympathetic divisions. So parachute, parasympathetic, calm you down. Sympathetic is the fight or flight. We have Shelley Taylor's theory about tend and befriend, basically suggesting that women experience different physiological responses than men, and women are often more caring and supportive for offspring during times of stress than men would actually be. Probably the most important physiological response from this section is from Hans Selye. It's known as the GAS theory, GAS, standing for General Adaptation Syndrome. And basically, this is it's a physiological response to stress, but it's non-specific. Basically meaning that stress doesn't vary. The response to stress responses don't vary. And so whatever the stress is, like from frustration or conflict, or whether it's an acute stressor or chronic stressor, stress responses and stress reactions are non-specific. So the first step is the alarm phase. That's when you have fight or flight. You're trying to attack the stress as best you can, but you're responding with fight or flight like it's an emergency. So that's stage 1. Stage 2 is the resistance stage. So now you're using your coping mechanisms, your abilities to try to handle and manage stress in your most effective ways. And that's a resistance. And then stage 3, if you're still dealing with it, you're now experiencing the exhaustion part of the stage. This is where you've depleted your body's stress responses, and as a result, you've got nothing left. So you're exhausted, your responses are depleted, so you give in to the stress. When you look at stress and what actually happens in the body, there are actually some chemicals that are released that are connected to the autonomic nervous system and then different adrenal glands or the adrenal cortex. So you produce both catecholamines and corticosteroids. One is what gives energy to fight or flight physiological change. The other one is what actually gives you just the energy increase. So when you release catecholamines by the adrenal gland, you're experiencing fight or flight changes to your body. You're experiencing things like pupil dilation and increased heart rate and sweating. When you experience a release of corticosteroids by the adrenal cortex, you're now getting the energy aspect. And then finally, we conclude with some behavioral responses to stress. This is a very dense slide, as you can see. Most of these are about the negative ways we handle stress, coping with stress, the unhealthy ways. So we've got catastrophic thinking. This is you on your way to school. You're on your way to school. You got to get there on time, 7:15, and you're getting stuck in traffic. And because you get stuck in traffic, you're now thinking, oh man, you're going to be late for school. And because you're late for school, you're going to get that tardy. You might miss your test. You might not have enough time to finish it. If you don't get to finish that test then and there, you're not sure when you're going to make it up later. Because you're not sure when you're going to make it up later, you don't know if you're going to even do it at all. Then you're thinking, oh man, I might have to take a failing grade on the test, or maybe take a 0. That's going to make you fail a class. If you fail that class, it's going to tank your GPA. Take your GPA, you probably can't get into college or any colleges that you would want to go to. If that happens, you're never going to get a career that you might want. You're never going to amount to anything. As a result, you're doomed for the rest of your life. That's catastrophic thinking, all right? So you want to avoid that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be quite to that level, but that's the idea, the mentality of building it up. Aggression, dealing with others, how you create frustration that leads to aggression, how sometimes aggression can cause frustration. You may indulge yourself. You may choose to show signs of poor impulse control. You might work out really hard. You might eat a bunch of junk. You might just sit in a corner and cry. This is indulging yourself. And then there are some constructive coping mechanisms, healthy efforts to try to handle stress. Working out is a great way, but you don't want to overwork out. You don't want to cause injuries. Finding some balance, maybe meditation, doing something that kind of calms you down and relaxes the body and mind is going to be a constructive coping mechanism for stress. And that's where we're going to stop. So thanks for joining me as always, and I'll see you next time as we do the second half of the psychological effects of stress and conclude Unit 7A. Adios.